Well, my name is Donn Weaver. I'm an Army veteran, and I'm here today to talk to you about Veterans Day, the history, the meaning of Veterans Day, what veterans think about Veterans Day. I know from your perspective, as you sit there in class and you think about, that's that holiday in the middle of the week, Wednesday, November 11th this year. I also want you to understand how it came to be, why it came to be, and how important it is. The story of Veterans Day begins at the end of at that time, the bloodiest war in the history of mankind. World War I, which was fought largely in Europe, ended on November 11th at 11 o'clock in the morning and was called Armistice Day. Those people that signed that armistice in Paris, France that day, where the Germans, the Austrians, and others were defeated by the Americans, the British, the French, and other Allied forces. When they signed that document, they called it the armistice. They also called it the war to end all wars. They were wrong. And as you look at history, you'll see that a way that armistice was done gave rise, less than a generation later, to a whole new set of tyrannical leaders that ended up engaging in World War II, the costliest war in the history of the world. So anyway, in 1938, after World War I had ended, been going for a while, the American government decided to designate that day as a holiday, a legal holiday, November 11th. In 1954, they changed the name from Armistice Day to Veterans Day. I want to, at this point, talk to you about the difference between Veterans Day and Memorial Day. Veterans Day is meant to honor all veterans who've ever served. Right now, today, in the United States, there are 18.8 million veterans who are alive, including over 200,000 veterans in total alive for a bit longer who served in World War II. Remember, World War II for the American side was 1941 to 1945. So these people, your great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents in some cases, very few are left alive today, but they did so much for our country. When I talk about 18.8 million American veterans today alive, that's 7.6% of the American population. So less than 10% of the American population has ever served in the military. So as we think about Veterans Day, we want to contrast it to Memorial Day. Memorial Day is a day held, an American holiday in May, the last Monday of every month of May, in which we honor the veterans who have fallen in military conflicts. Since our history began in the Revolutionary War in 1776, that history includes a total of 1.2 million Americans who have actually died in our nation's conflicts. So Memorial Day is a sacred day to honor those who have passed. Veterans Day, though, in November 11th, is a day to honor the veterans who are living and who ever served, as well as those who have passed for other causes. So I think that if you think about it that way, Veterans Day, one day a year for veterans, one day a year for Memorial Day to honor the veterans who've fallen, that's a pretty reasonable and to do. Why? Why do we even say, why are veterans honored when some other segments of our society are not? Well, first of all, many in our society are honored. There's Law Enforcement Day, there's First Responders Day, there's all kinds of days to honor people who think of service before self. And that's what veterans have done, isn't it? They've put duty to country, to protect the country ahead of themselves. Maybe 2 years, maybe 4 years, maybe 40 years. It all depends on their service and the needs of the country. I mentioned before that 18.8 million American veterans are now alive, and that we had a total of 18 million Americans who served in World War II, with now only a little more than 200,000 World War II veterans still alive. But think about it, in 2 or 3 years, they won't be. But there'll always be veterans. Everybody who served at any point, for whatever capacity, whether it be an active war, a Cold War that we went through for many years, or a time of peace, because they put aside their thoughts of civilian things and went and did service to the country. There's an important point to that. If you know your mother, your father, an aunt or uncle, or even a grandfather who was joined the military after 1983, every one of them joined voluntarily. They chose to go into the military. While there's a registration at this point for American men who turn age 18 to register for the draft, there is no draft. So those Americans who joined since 1983 to be in our military forces are among the most, how do I say that, focused, patriotic, and centered their lives on some form of service. And again, it doesn't matter how long they're in, and it's not them who chooses whether there's a war then or not. So veterans are an important part of our history. What if we didn't have any veterans? Well, first of all, there'd be no America. America was founded in revolution. Thousands of American colonialists who decided to break away from Britain decided from 1774 to 1789, when our Constitution was signed, that they would do everything possible, including give up their lives, if necessary, to become an independent country, to become the United States of America instead of another colony of Great Britain. So those that went and sacrificed for all those that time, they chose to do that. And sometimes they were drafted because the country needed them to go to the various wars, but they always served. And thus, if you think about it, if we had no veterans, what would have happened in World War I? The Germans likely could have won and changed the whole course of history. Without World War II veterans, there would definitely be us speaking German now, or without Cold War veterans, Russian. We would not be that free and independent country. I think it's important for you to remember, veterans don't decide on how America functions as a democracy, but veterans protect the right of the American people to elect the government that will decide how America functions. You've just seen a very important American election. However it turned out, you know that the American military will support the government that the people selected. And thus the veteran's responsibility is pretty deep, isn't it? Some people ask me, well, how do you celebrate properly Veterans Day? Well, I'm glad that it's an official holiday, and I understand that you've had it or will have it off, depending upon when you're viewing this tape, away from school. But also think about the veterans in your life. Maybe your grandfather or your grandmother, or maybe an uncle. Maybe give them a phone call. Hey, I was just thinking about you. We had this great beach picnic, but I couldn't help remember the only reason we're having that picnic on this usual school day is because of you and the millions of other veterans in the United States. Or maybe you'll go to a Veterans Day ceremony at the Veterans Memorial Center. Starts at 9 o'clock on November 11th this year. And there are some other things too. Melbourne is having a drive-in Veterans Day fireworks show on that Wednesday night down in Melbourne. So think about veterans at some point during the day. Also, veterans are usually proud, aren't they? How many times have you gone to the mall or other places and seen a veteran with a hat on or a shirt that reflects a veteran organization or military service? You might go up to that person and say, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. And by the way, veterans don't usually like to hear Happy Veterans Day. It's not, it's Merry Christmas, but Happy Veterans Day, that's the kind of thing would say, wait a minute, I'm here today because I served, and I'm proud that I served, but I lost friends along the way, or friends have died as a result of military service. So they just want to be recognized rather than celebrated in a jovial way. That's why there are no fireworks on Veterans Day, except at the Melbourne show, where they want to celebrate veterans after the ceremony. Memorial Day is a different thing. Definitely, you do not want to say Happy Memorial Day. Just, if you know a veteran on Memorial Day in May, simply say, I'm proud to know you. I hope you know how much America appreciates what you've done. What do veterans think about that service? First of all, almost every veteran I know of is proud they did it. Whether drafted or not, they're proud they did it. They took a section out of their lives and they went on active duty. Most veterans also learned a lot. They may have learned things like leadership, management. They certainly learned time management, because training in the military requires time management, careful teamwork, careful orchestration, putting others ahead of self, depending on each other. All these things that make for a better citizen. Most veterans I know, when they leave the military, whether it be Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, or the newest Space Force, when Space Force people start retiring or leaving, then you'll see they say, I'm really glad I served, but really when I have a chance, no matter what I do with the rest of my life, I want to keep serving. And I'm delighted to tell you that here today, that's what I do. I was only in the Army for 4 years, but I learned so much. It helped me to a 40-year career in the federal government. And I'm with Paul Julian, a former Navy and Coast Guard person who is now serving and is a key leader in a Sea Cadet battalion here at the Veterans Memorial Center, and also the director of our library. All volunteer work that Paul does. With him, and to help me and to film this, is Joe Davey. Joe is a veteran who served a lot of years here, and once we built this library, ever since I think the very first day, Joe Davey has been here, serving to make this library the best it can be in all of Brevard County military libraries. So thank you, Joe, and thank you, Paul, for helping me do this today. So you see, veterans are engaged because they were veterans. You have to also remember that veterans are given some benefits that other Americans don't receive and that many veterans take advantage of. For example, I was able to go to graduate school on the government GI. Government issue is what GI comes from. GI Bill, and also buy the first house in many cases with no money down. So, and I think the most special thing is they can be buried along with their spouses at veterans' national cemeteries or special sections of private cemeteries all around. And if you have a chance, especially by Memorial Day, and if you haven't visited, go up to Scottsmore in the northern part of Brevard County to visit the Cape Canaveral National Cemetery and see all the veterans who did their service in all periods. I think the veterans, since it's only 5 years old, the veteran who died, there are dozens of World War II veterans, hundreds of World War II veterans there, but very few that were World War I because it's a new cemetery. But the veterans who ended up when they are laid to rest, whether they died in combat or lived for 100+ years, they are entitled to that burial with honors at that cemetery at no charge. So at this point, before we leave the library and show you around some things at the museum, I wanted to tell you about another special program that you could get involved in to help and honor veterans. It's called the Veterans History Project. Here at the Brevard Veterans Memorial Center, located behind the Merritt Square Mall in Merritt Island, we have a VHP, Veterans History Project, with over 220 DVDs of interviews with veterans, going all the way back to veterans who served in World War II, and many of which have since died. So these veterans are honored with these DVDs. A copy is given to their families, a copy is sent to the Library of Congress, and a copy is kept right here. How does it impact you? Let's say, for example, your social studies or history teacher says, do a research paper about World War II. Well, you could go on Google and write it up in 10 minutes, or you could contact us and you could watch a tape from a real World War II veterans tell about his story. Not only do I promise you an A for writing it up if you spell everything correctly, but I promise you your teacher will be very proud, because this is research done from the actual source. Not just even reading another book, but going to the source of the information. That's why their stories are so valuable. And if you have a veteran in your family and you don't know much about what they did, they should tell their story. So your family and the people that come into your family that aren't yet born will know the story of that veteran. That's the Veterans History Project. Bear with me now, and I'll ask Paul and Joe to come with me to the library, and we'll take a look at some of the memorabilia, some of the actual artifacts of some periods of American military history where veterans served. Remember, we talked first about the very first American veterans, Revolutionary War veterans. 1774, when the first shot was fired, the first rebellion, all the way till 1781, when the British surrendered. A long war in American history, the Revolutionary War. This is a period of time where America is getting its feet on the ground, trying to develop as an independent country. 13 original colonies that fought against each other as often as not, finally came together and became a united country. But the country was pretty weak, wasn't it? Because it wasn't much longer before the British tried again. They attacked the United States in the War of 1812. Luckily, we were just strong enough to defeat the British and cement our sovereignty. It was ironic that we would not be attacked again on the mainland by an outside power in any large scale until the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. That was not even an American state at that time, Hawaii, but that was a kind of an important remembrance that the oceans and before aircraft, the difficulties of attacking helped America to become a strong country. Now we're standing in the section of the museum that honors the veterans of the Civil War. You have to believe that the Civil War was the saddest war in our history. Brother against brother was common. Over 400,000 Americans died. The blue and the gray, South and the North, slave state versus free state. They fought and they died, but remember, whether you were a Confederate veteran or a Union veteran, you were a veteran. You took up arms for the cause of what you believed in. And thank heavens, the Union side won and the country healed thereafter and began that long process that you read about all day, every day in today's news about how we can make this country the best it can be. We almost lost this country in the period of 1861 to 1865, the Civil War. Now we're in the section of the museum that honors those who served in World War I. Remember, World War I was a war that began in 1914 in Europe, but the United States didn't enter until 1917. The American entry during that last year plus was important to sway the balance of power and help the Allied side win. So World War I veterans then had a tough challenge. It was trench warfare. You've seen, I hope, movies that depicted World War I and the challenges they faced. I'll ask Paul to pan around now while I'm talking to show you some of the World War I memorabilia up close. I can't believe these uniforms these guys had to wear, and the leggings and the heavy nature of uniforms, too hot in the summer and not warm enough in the winter. But they did it, and they fought, and they served. World War I was an important part that launched, important war that launched America onto the world stage as the dominant military power. I'm standing now in front of a World War II era Jeep with the World War II uniform depicted, machine gun on the back in the middle of our museum. World War II was a war, remember I mentioned 18 million Americans were drafted or volunteered to serve in World War II. For the United States, it really began on December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. While I'm talking, I'm going to ask Paul to go ahead and get up and walk around and show you some things about World War II, and I'll keep talking. World War II, for your family, was probably your great-grandfather, great-grandmother heavily involved, and it really was a case of trying to protect this country from what was called the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan. So the United States again came late into that war, like they had in World War I, and the British were just about at the end of their rope. Germany had already seized most of Europe and was primed to invade Britain and perhaps change the whole course of history in that way. So as Paul screens down here and you look at some of the memorabilia from World War II that we have, I want you to focus on the fact that a good museum also depicts the enemies. If we go down a little bit further, you'll see Japanese and German memorabilia on the left here. Paul will show you, and keep walking forward. And this depicts how, while they were the enemy, in many cases you have to understand the enemy and then remember the challenges that the enemy had that gave us in terms of that warfare. So World War II ending in 1945, a very important part of American military history. I will say that World War II, there will be a veteran from World War II speaking during our Veterans Day ceremony coming up. Okay? 5 years after World War II ended, the United States was called again to war, in a war that has become the tradition, the sad tradition of what we face now. A war that did not result in total victory, but in a war that some call the Forgotten War, that protected and saved the southern half of the Korean Peninsula and dented the effort by Communist China and Communist North Korea to control the entire peninsula. Many people went to that battlefield in Korean War and fought the whole length of the peninsula, finally settling at the DMZ, Demilitarized Zone, which is still there today. And in fact, the Korean War is not over, technically. There was not an armistice signed, there's a truce, but the war is still there, which is why we have over 35,000 Americans in Korea today to help protect the Korean people and the freedom that they enjoy. They've become one of the top 10 economic powers in the entire world, South Korea. While North Korea, that you've probably heard about, is run by a despot, and the people starve regularly every winter. The Korean War, the Forgotten War. After the truce agreement was signed in 1952, the Cold War resumed full tilt. The Cold War actually began in 1946 in a standoff with the Russians. It accelerated with the Russians and finally became an outright nuclear arms race and buildup of military that lasted until the early 1990s. Even today, you'll hear in the news about negotiations with the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians, all about their nuclear arms capabilities and our ability. The Cold War was the label put on. It actually never turned into a hot war, luckily, but it was definitely a war for survival and a war to make sure that our country stayed free and stayed away from massive nuclear destruction. In 1961, the United States decided to send advisors to the Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam, in Asia, because the French had just lost the country, and again they were concerned, like Korea, that communism would be a tidal wave and take over that country as well. Over the next many years, until 1975, when the last American left, several million Americans served in Vietnam, many of them on multiple tours in Vietnam. There was a draft, and many people were drafted. By the late 60s, early 70s, the country in many senses turned against the war. And I will tell you as a veteran, the worst thing you can imagine as a veteran, besides the loss of your friend, the loss of someone you care about in battle, is that the country doesn't support what you do. And so that became a turning point in American history in terms of the necessity to commit the population of our country in any conflict. Again, Vietnam did not turn out as a classic military victory, but there are many reasons why having our forces fight in Vietnam caused a long-term stability that has helped our country. In fact, today, the Vietnamese, all one communist country, are a trading partner with America. Many Americans go there as tourists, and they are not allowing themselves to be taken over by the Russia or China. After Vietnam, you remember I mentioned Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. On September 11th, 2001, before any of you were born, we had the next worst attack on our country. In fact, more Americans and other foreigners were killed in that attack in September of 2001 than were killed at Pearl Harbor. Almost 3,000 Americans, New York City, the Pentagon, and an aircraft that the passengers managed to cause to nosedive into the Pennsylvania mountain countryside. So 9/11, which hopefully you had a separate topic on that. We won't go into detail on that, but that created once again the need for more Americans to volunteer, more Americans to engage. And I repeat again, the Americans who have fought since 9/11 have all volunteered, have all chosen to go into the military. I will mention as we screen down here, there were several conflicts in between Vietnam and 9/11 and the war we now are still engaging in with Iraq and Afghanistan. But we are mention one of these that you'll see at our museum, Black Hawk Down, the battle in Somalia in the late 90s. And you have other activities, the Gulf War, a very short war, a 100-hour war, fought in 1991. But the war that we're most engaged in and you hear most about now, still going on 19 years later. The war on terror, or the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, and many other countries against radical terrorists. I've enjoyed talking to you today about Veterans Day, what it means, and why it's an important holiday. I want to end by sharing with you a little bit more about our Veterans Memorial Center. We're standing on the 3rd floor of our tower that is located at the center. Again, it's right behind Merritt Square Mall. If you haven't been there, please come. I'll ask Paul to start panning now. He'll show you our Veterans Memorial Plaza, where we have a lot of very important monuments to the war periods and dedications of bricks to those who want to be honored by their families. So we're, again, a beautiful location right on Sykes Creek. And as you look at the Veterans Memorial Plaza, you'll see in the center there the monument to our Revolutionary War. And you'll see the first statue there on the left is the gold point from World War I, which you saw a picture of, a mannequin of a gold point in the museum. And that's that same uniform, you see it there. The helicopters are from the Vietnam era. The jet is a Cold War Navy jet. And you'll see monuments on the right-hand side. Afghanistan, Iraq, some interesting military silhouettes. That's the new U-Haul building, storage center and they put military silhouettes becoming part of our partnership here in the area. Very nice of them to do that. So you see this beautiful park. There's fishing, there's hiking, there's a 5-kilometer race is almost set up, almost completed the course. There'll eventually be power and lights and lots of trees planted. At this point, we host the Raider Challenges for many of your school, the Raider meets, and we've had cross-country teams come here, and we really want to welcome all of you with your families, or as school tours of the museum or the park. Again, Paulo, stop at this point, turn back around. I just want to end this by saying I'm sorry I couldn't answer any questions. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but very glad I had this opportunity to talk to you about what Veterans Day is, why it is, and what you might want to do on Veterans Day. Thank you.